Welcome to World Health News. This is your host, Dr. Yavuz Selim Sılay, physician, entrepreneur, and venture architect. I am really thrilled and excited to share a very interesting and hot topic, vaccine nationalism around COVID-19 and how it impacts the COVID-19 fight. As you all know, Russia, China, as well as the United States, United Kingdom, and the European Union have spent tens of billions of dollars on deals with vaccine frontrunners such as Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, and Oxford AstraZeneca. Even before the end of the final stage of human trials and regulatory approval, several wealthier countries like Britain, France, Germany, and the United States have entered into pre-purchase agreements with COVID-19 vaccine manufacturers, a development that has come to be known as the vaccine nationalism. There are fears that such advanced agreements will make the initial few vaccines unaffordable and inaccessible to everyone apart from the rich countries in a world of roughly 8 billion people. This has led to the World Health Organization warning that nations that hoard possible COVID-19 vaccines while excluding others would deepen the pandemic. We need to prevent vaccine nationalism. Sharing finite supplies strategically and globally is actually in each country's national interest, WHO Chief Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus said. And basically, to bring about equitable and broad access, World Health Organization, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation, and Gavi have came up with an initiative known as the COVAX Facility. The facility aims to procure at least 2 billion doses of COVID-19 vaccines by the end of the next year for deployment and distribution, mainly in the low and middle income countries. So, ladies and gentlemen, what is vaccine nationalism?
This is a chart of COVID-19 cases in the UK. In April, the UK's rate of new cases climbed so high that it was second only to the US. Around that time, researchers at Oxford University who were developing a COVID-19 vaccine had started planning to do a large-scale test of the vaccine in the UK. But by July, new COVID-19 cases in the country had fallen. It was good news, but it also meant the UK was no longer a good place to test a vaccine. And that's because of a crucial part of the process of testing any new vaccine, what's called the Phase 3 human trials. Before we can end the coronavirus pandemic, a vaccine developer will have to give tens of thousands of participants either the vaccine or a placebo. And then we wait, for months or possibly years, to see how many of each group eventually gets COVID-19, while the participants go about their lives, which right now probably means they're living under COVID-19 restrictions like wearing masks and staying at home. But until enough of those participants get sick, there won't be enough data on whether the vaccine is working. And in the meantime, thousands of people are dying of COVID-19 every day. That's why some people are starting to advocate a different, more controversial model. Instead of waiting for the coronavirus to eventually infect some of these people, what if we gave a group of willing volunteers the virus on purpose?
I'm a young guy, I'm 23 years old, I'm relatively healthy.
I have no pre-existing health conditions, I have no children, no dependents.
It's really important that we do everything we can to speed up research and development.
It's 2016, and this man is about to drink a test tube of the bacteria that causes typhoid. He's one of about 100 participants who deliberately infected themselves with it to test a new vaccine in the UK.
In March 2016, I downed a shot of typhoid.
Dinah was another participant. She was a PhD student who needed the money, but she also liked the idea of it.
It was like, I'm helping to make this disease less deadly.
This kind of study is called a human challenge trial. And in the case of the typhoid vaccine, researchers told the New York Times that doing the challenge trial saved them 3 or 4 years. To put that in context, it helps to look at the bigger picture of how a vaccine normally gets developed. The first step in the process is to test a vaccine in a lab on either human cells or on animals, just to see if it causes any harm. This is called the preclinical phase. If it passes that test, it enters human trials. This is the longest and most important part. If it passes human trials, the vaccine gets licensed by regulators and can be manufactured and distributed to the public. Human trials typically have 3 phases, each one testing a larger and larger group of people. Phase 1 involves a very small group of people, maybe 50, and mainly tests if the vaccine is safe. Phase 2 usually involves a few hundred participants. This is where we start learning if the vaccine actually works. And then there's the final test, the Phase 3 trial. It's expensive, it takes time, it requires tens of thousands of volunteers, and it involves as broad a cross-section of participants as possible. The entire process of developing a vaccine usually takes around 10 years, but many COVID-19 vaccine developers are racing to compress this entire process into about a year and a half. One way they are doing this is to overlap the different phases, conducting several different trials at once, or to ramp up the manufacturing of a vaccine while it's still being tested so that if it works, it can be distributed right away. As of the making of this video, there were 166 COVID-19 vaccines in various stages of development. 24 vaccine candidates are already in the human trial phase, and 5 of them are already in Phase 3. For these leading candidates, a human challenge trial could save weeks or months by augmenting a Phase 3 trial that isn't getting data fast enough. And for any of these candidates in preclinical phases, a challenge study followed by a larger-scale safety study for the vaccine could replace a Phase 3 trial altogether. A challenge trial that successfully shrinks down this timeline could save thousands of lives. And so far, a grassroots movement has recruited more than 30,000 volunteers from over 100 countries who said they would participate in a challenge trial for COVID-19 if it happens.
My moral values say that I kind of have an obligation to do what I can to help.
I see it as very similar to other acts of public service, like trying to fight climate change and disastrous events that are forthcoming, that are the consequences of a lack of care.
It's affecting literally pretty much every person globally. I feel like I need to do something to help.
Here's the problem. Human challenge studies have been used before for cholera, typhoid, malaria, influenza, and the common cold. But there's a big, important difference that sets COVID-19 apart.
For each of those conditions, we do have effective treatment so that we know, to my knowledge, no one has actually ever died in those studies.
Peter Smith is one of the world's leading epidemiologists, and he was one of the first to advocate for the possibility of human challenge trials in March of this year. He says because there is no COVID-19 treatment, it limits who could participate in a challenge study.
Challenge trial would necessarily be done in people who were at very low risk of serious disease.
In other words, unlike in a typical Phase 3 trial where you'd recruit the widest range of people possible, a COVID-19 challenge trial would produce data on a much narrower group of young, healthy people. And we don't know if a vaccine that works for that group would work for everyone. But the immediate goal is not to get a single COVID-19 vaccine that offers perfect protection. In the US, to be deemed sufficiently effective, a vaccine just has to work 50% better than not being vaccinated. An imperfect vaccine could still slow the spread of the virus. The bigger issue with a COVID-19 challenge study is that there's no way to guarantee that it's actually safe for participants. On one hand, the risk of hospitalization for young people is relatively low, and a study of the outbreak in New York City suggests the risk of death for young people is as low as 0.01%. And advocates for COVID-19 challenge trials say that's a level of risk we already accept in similar situations. They point out it's even lower than the risk of fatality from donating a kidney. But any risk of harm or death at all would still set it way apart from any other challenge study. And the long-term risks of COVID-19 for those who recover are still almost entirely unknown. We emailed nearly all of the institutions who were reachable who are currently developing a vaccine to see whether they would consider human challenge trials. And none would go on the record saying they're considering it. But we know that at least one is seriously considering it. Developers of the Oxford University vaccine said that they hope to do challenge trials by the end of the year. In 2016, the World Health Organization's stance on human challenge studies was that it would not be ethical or safe to use them for a disease that is virulent and has no existing therapies to treat it. But in May of this year, they released new guidelines, saying that they could theoretically be considered if there was confidence that the potential benefits of SARS-CoV-2 challenge studies outweigh the risks. If challenge studies do reduce the time it takes to get a vaccine, those benefits are clear. If the current leading candidates have quick, successful phase 3 trials, we may never need to do a challenge trial for COVID-19 at all. But if we do, it'll only be possible because there are people out there willing to take on this risk.
It's worth it to me to save the lives of a countless number of people.
I'm happy to take that small risk to myself and make things better for a lot of people.
Feeling like I was doing nothing and just feeling miserable and demoralized, to being like, okay, like I have something I can do here.
Well, I'm a lot less at risk than my parents and grandparents are, and my moral imperative tells me I have to do it.
When a country manages to secure doses of vaccines for its own citizens or residents and prioritizes its own domestic markets before they are made available in other countries, it is known as vaccine nationalism. This is done through pre-purchase agreements between a government and the vaccine manufacturer. For example, the United States, the United Kingdom, Japan, and the European Union have spent tens of billions of dollars on deals with vaccine frontrunners such as Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, and AstraZeneca, even before their effectiveness is proven. And vaccine nationalism is not new. The present race to hoard COVID-19 vaccines harks back to a similar situation that happened in 2009 during the H1N1 flu pandemic. Australia, the first country to come up with a vaccine, blocked exports while some of the wealthiest countries entered into pre-purchase agreements with several pharmaceutical companies. The US alone obtained the right to buy 600,000 doses. It was only when the H1N1 pandemic began to recede that developed countries offered to donate vaccine doses to poorer economies. However, it must be noted that H1N1 was a milder disease and its impact was far lesser than COVID-19, which has already infected more than 25 million people worldwide and killed about 1 million people. So United States, United Kingdom, and European Union have already secured deals worth millions. And according to London-based analytics firms Airfinity, the US, Britain, and European Union and Japan have so far secured about 1.3 billion doses of potential COVID-19 vaccines. Options to snap up more supplies or pending deals will add more 1.45 billion doses, its figures show. If seen country-wise, the United States has already agreed to buy some 800 million doses from 6 drug makers, and the United Kingdom 200 million from 5. Just recently, the European Union negotiated with AstraZeneca for the purchase of 300 million doses of the vaccine candidate developed by the Oxford University. It has also struck a deal with French pharmaceutical giant Sanofi for 300 million doses. Airfinity has predicted that worldwide supply may not reach 1 billion doses until the first quarter of 2022. And aren't there any laws to prevent vaccine nationalism? Interestingly, even though vaccine nationalism runs against global public health principles, there are no provisions in international laws that prevent pre-purchase agreements. So what are its drawbacks? What is the alternative? The major drawback of vaccine nationalism is that it puts countries with fewer resources and bargaining power at a disadvantage. So if countries with large number of cases lag in obtaining the vaccine, the disease will continue to disrupt global supply chain and as a result, economies around the world. So if you were to try to vaccinate the entire United States and the entire European Union, for example, with 2 doses of vaccine, then you would get about 1.7 billion doses. And if that is the number of doses that's available, there is not a lot left for others. So if a handful or even 30 or 40 countries have vaccines, but more than 150 other countries don't. And then the epidemic, which is a global epidemic, will rage and will continue to rage there. So the alternative to arrest vaccine nationalism is global collaboration, which is being done through the World Health Organization's backed COVAX facility mechanism. So far, more than 170 countries have expressed interest, and about 90 low and middle income countries and 80 fully self-financing countries. The countries who join the initiative are assured to supply of vaccines whenever they become successful. Moreover, the countries will get assured supplies to protect at least 20% of their population. 172 countries and multiple candidate vaccines engaged in COVID-19 vaccine global access facility. So 9 CP-supported candidate vaccines are part of the COVAX initiative, with a further 9 candidates under evaluation and procurement conversations ongoing with additional producers not currently receiving research and development funding through COVAX, giving the largest and most diverse COVID-19 vaccine portfolio in the world. 80 potentially self-financing countries have submitted 9 binding expressions of interest to GAVI-coordinated COVAX facility, joining 92 low and middle income economies that are eligible to be supported by the COVAX Advanced Market Commitment, known as AMC. Goal of bringing the pandemic under control via equitable access to COVID-19 vaccines needs urgent, broad-scale commitment and investment from countries. 172 economies are now engaged in discussions to potentially participate in COVAX, a global initiative aimed at working with vaccine manufacturers to provide countries worldwide equitable access to safe and effective vaccines once they are licensed and approved. COVAX currently has the world's largest and most diverse COVID-19 vaccine portfolio, including 9 candidate vaccines, with a further 9 under evaluation and conversation underway. So the COVAX, the Vaccines Pillar of the Access to COVID-19 Tools Act Accelerator, is co-led by the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation, CEPI, and GAVI, the Vaccine Alliance, and the World Health Organization, working in partnership with developed and developing country vaccine manufacturers. It is the only global initiative that is working with governments and manufacturers to ensure COVID-19 vaccines are available worldwide to both higher income and lower income. In order to be able to secure enough doses of vaccines to protect the most vulnerable populations, such as health workers, physicians, nurses, and the elderly, the next step for the partnership is to confirm potential self-financing participants intend to participate, and then turn these into binding commitments to join COVID-19 Vaccine Global Access Facility, COVAX facility. So with the upfront payments to follow thereafter, there will be a much broader opportunity for globally fighting COVID-19. Equal access to a COVID-19 vaccine is the key to beating the virus and paving the way for recovery from the pandemic, said Stefan Löfven, the Prime Minister of Sweden. This cannot be a race with a few winners, and the COVAX facility is an important part of the solution, making sure all countries can benefit from access to the world's largest portfolio of candidates and fair and equitable distribution of vaccine doses. The COVAX facility is a GAVI-coordinated pooled procurement mechanism for new COVID-19 vaccines, through which COVAX will ensure fair and equitable access to vaccines for each participating economy using an allocation framework currently being formulated by World Health Organization. The COVAX facility will do this by pooling buying power from participating economies and providing volume guarantees across a range of promising vaccine candidates, allowing those vaccine manufacturers whose expertise is essential to large-scale production of the new vaccines to make early at-risk investments in manufacturing capacity, providing participating countries and economies with the best chance at rapid access to doses of successful COVID-19 vaccines. The success of COVAX hinges not only on countries signing up the COVAX facility, but also filling key funding gaps for both COVAX R&D work and mechanism to support participation of lower income economies in the COVAX facility. COVID-19 is an unprecedented global health challenge that can only be met with unprecedented cooperation between governments, researchers, manufacturers, and multilateral partners, said Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, the Director General of World Health Organization. By pooling resources and acting in solidarity through the ACT Accelerator and the COVAX facility, we can ensure that once a vaccine is available for COVID-19, it is available globally to all countries. CP is leading COVAX vaccine research and development work, which aims to develop 3 safe and effective vaccines which can be made available to countries participating in the COVAX facility. 9 candidate vaccines are currently being supported by CEPI, 7 of which are currently in clinical trials. Governments, vaccine manufacturers, in addition to their own R&D, organizations and individuals have committed United States of an amount of 1.4 billion United States dollars towards vaccine R&D so far. But an additional $1 billion is urgently needed to continue to move the portfolio forward. A further 9 candidates vaccines which complemented the current CEPI portfolio are currently being evaluated for inclusion in COVAX. Furthermore, COVAX will consider procuring vaccines that complement the portfolio from any producer in the world. Conversations are already underway with a number of additional manufacturers not receiving R&D support from CEPI to procure their vaccine, if they are successful. Maximizing the portfolio of vaccines increases the probability of success, as individual vaccines historically have a high failure rate, ladies and gentlemen. In the scramble for a vaccine, countries can act alone, creating a few winners and many losers, or they can come together to participate in a COVAX, an initiative which is built on enlightened self-interest, but also equity, leaving no country behind, said Richard Hatchett, the CEO of CEPI. Only by taking a global view, we can protect those most at risk around the world from the terrible effects from this disease. COVAX can deliver the vaccines that could end the pandemic, but it needs countries to step forward both to join the COVAX facility and also to address the serious funding shortfalls, including R&D. The decisions that are taken now about COVID-19 vaccines have the power to change our future. We must be courageous and ambitious in striving for a multilateral solution. So, a collaboration between the Serum Institute of India, GAVI, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation announced earlier that it will ensure up to 100 million doses of AstraZeneca's or Novavax candidate vaccines, if successful, will be available to low and middle income economies through COVAX facility at just $3 per dose. The arrangement also provides an option to secure additional doses if COVAX sees a need for it. Separate agreements between GAVI, CEPI, and AstraZeneca announced in June guarantee further 300 million doses of their candidate vaccines if successful for the COVAX facility. In addition, in June, GAVI launched the COVAX Advanced Market Commitment, a financing instrument aimed at supporting the participation of 92 lower and middle income economies in the COVAX facility. The COVAX AMC has raised more than $600 million against an initial target of securing $2 billion seed funding from sovereign donors as well as philanthropy and the private sector needed by the end of 2020. Funding the COVAX AMC will be critical to ensuring ability to pay is not a barrier to accessing COVID-19 vaccines, a situation which would leave the majority of the world unprotected, with the pandemic and its impact continuing unabated. 8 higher-income economies, which would finance the vaccines from their own public finance budgets, have so far submitted expressions of interest ahead of the meetings, and they will partner with 92 low and middle-income countries that will be supported by the AMC, if it meets the funding targets. Together, this group of 172 countries represents more than 70% of the world's population. Among the group are representation from every continent and more than half of the world's G20 economies. The momentum we are witnessing behind this unprecedented global effort means there could be a light at the end of the tunnel. A vaccine is our best route to ending the acute phase of the pandemic, and the COVAX effort is the best way to get there, said Seth Berkley, the CEO of GAVI, the Vaccine Alliance. For higher income countries, it represents a win-win. Not only will you be guaranteed access to the world's largest portfolio of vaccines, you will also be negotiating as part of a global consortium, bringing down prices and ensuring truly global access. Signing up the COVAX facility gives each country its best chance at protecting the most vulnerable members of their population, which in turn gives the world its best chance at mitigating the toll this pandemic has taken on individuals, communities, and the global economy. To make this end-to-end vision a reality, we need countries to make end-to-end commitments funding R&D, signing up the facility, and supporting COVAX AMC. The COVAX facility is coordinated by GAVI, the Vaccine Alliance, and forms a key part of COVAX, the vaccines pillar of the ACT Accelerator, a groundbreaking global collaboration involving vaccine manufacturers to accelerate the development, production, and equitable access to COVID-19 tests, treatments, and vaccines. The overall aim of COVAX is to accelerate the development and manufacture of COVID-19 vaccines and to guarantee fair and equitable access for every country in the world. It will achieve this by sharing the risk associated with vaccine development and, where necessary, investing in manufacturing upfront so vaccines can be deployed at scale as soon as they are proven to be safe and effective, and pooling procurement and purchasing power to achieve sufficient volumes to end the acute phase of the pandemic by 2021. The goal of COVAX is, by the end of 2021, to deliver 2 billion doses of safe, effective vaccines that have passed regulatory approval and/or World Health Organization pre-qualification. These vaccines will be offered equally to all participating countries, proportional to their population, initially prioritizing healthcare workers, then expanding to cover vulnerable groups such as the elderly and those with pre-existing conditions. Further doses will then be made available based on country need, vulnerability, and COVID-19 threat. The COVAX facility will also maintain a buffer of doses for emergency and humanitarian use, including dealing with severe outbreaks before the spiral out of control. So, ladies and gentlemen, as I mentioned, working together and learning from this calamity of COVID-19 is very important. And it is very important that we unite in these tough times as the human race and support each other and really make sure we protect our environment and make sure we find a way for equal access for all of the at-risk patient populations during COVID-19 and especially also the healthcare workers. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Dr. Selim Sulay, physician, entrepreneur, and venture architect. I'm really excited and thrilled that I was able to share this very important episode about vaccine nationalism as well as the Vaccine Alliance and opportunities coming up through World Health Organization. Take care and all the best. Bye.